Hello, my name's Roisin, and I like to make myself suffer. Hello friends, and welcome to my first reading challenge vlog of the year. As you'll know if you watched my 2020 reading goals video, link in the cards if you didn't, I have intended to try and do one challenge a month this year, and this is the first challenge. I am going to read 5 of the best-selling historical fictions of 2020 this year. As you know, I love historical fiction. It is my favourite genre. I have a whole playlist of videos about historical fiction that you can go and check out, and I'm trying to broaden my horizons. Generally speaking, I'm a bit of a snob, and I prefer literary historical fiction. Despite not wanting to, I still have like an underlying snobbishness where if something's popular, I'm like, probably not for me though, is it? And that is something that I don't really love about myself and something I want to get rid of. So I'm going to try and read the best-selling historical fiction. Now, as you may know, I read the top 10 Goodreads Choice Awards historical fiction last year and it didn't go that well. I'll again leave that in the cards if you want to watch that. It was a fun vlog, but I didn't have the best reading experience with all of those books. So this could go either way. I could get over my snobbishness, or I could feel even more confirmed in my knowledge of what I like and what I don't like. The way that I'm going to do this is the Waterstones website. So if I go on the bestsellers, and I'm going to go for the first 5 that I have not read already that are not sequels. So the first one here on this list is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which I have read, and I will leave in the cards above where I read that for the Women's Choice Awards. Next is A Single Thread by Tracey Chevalier, which I believe is a piece of historical fiction set in Britain during the interwar period about a woman who sews kneelers for Winchester Cathedral, I believe. I haven't read it. I have heard a lot of good things about it. So that will be the first one that I read, will be A Single Thread by Tracey Chevalier. Then we have Those Who Are Loved by Victoria Hislop. Now, I know precisely nothing about Victoria Hislop, except that her books are very popular. I imagine this is going to be like a family saga, or possibly World War II fiction. If you watched my historical reading the Goodreads Choice Awards vlogs, you will know that World War II fiction is kind of my least favourite historical genre, because often it romanticises things that I don't feel like should be romanticised. But anyway, we will see about that. I guess I'll have to read that because I haven't read it. So, and I don't think it's a sequel. I believe it's a standalone. Then we have Dark Tides by Philippa Gregory. I have definitely bad-mouthed Philippa Gregory on this channel before, but luckily for me, that is a sequel, so I'm not reading it. The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, definitely have read, absolutely loved. Jojo Moyes, The Giver of Stars. I have read Me Before You by Jojo Moyes and I didn't love it. In fact, I hated it. But I have someone I work with said that The Giver of Stars is very different from her other work, and it's historical fiction, which Me Before You was not. So I'll have to give that one a go and see how I feel about it. Then we have Chilka's Journey by Heather Morris, which is Holocaust fiction, but is also a sequel, so we're skipping that one. Bernard Cornwell Warlord, that is, I believe, a sequel. So again, not reading that. And of course, this comes to bite me on the arse. I badmouth Philippa Gregory and feel glad I'm not reading her sequel. And here comes the first one in that series, Tidelands. I'm going to be reading Philippa Gregory this January. Oh, maybe I'll love it. Maybe I've prejudged her. We'll have to see. 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, I have already read. The Other Bennett Sister by Dennis Hadlow, I have already read. The Shadow King by Marsman Geiste, I have already read. The Second Sleep is a sequel. The Evening and the Morning, I have already read. And The Tattooist of Auschwitz. Perfect Holocaust fiction. Very, very popular. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe I'll love it. So I will be reading that. Okay, so that's it. That's the books that I'm going to be reading in this vlog. I'm going to be reading A Single Thread by Tracey Chevalier, Those Who Are Loved by Victoria Hislop, The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, Tidelands by Philippa Gregory, and The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. Well, let's roll the next clip and see how this is going. I made a big mistake when I was looking through the best-selling books on Waterstone. The Betrayals was right there as the number 2, and I just skipped over it, just kept reading. I haven't read The Betrayals. The Betrayals is not a sequel, so I'm going to read The Betrayals instead of The Tattooist of Auschwitz, because The Tattooist of Auschwitz was 5th on my list, so that's why it gets dropped off, which I am quite pleased about, because as I've already mentioned, I'm not a huge fan of Holocaust fiction, and in doing some research for this video, I came across some of the controversy about The Tattooist of Auschwitz and how it perfectly sums up why I don't like to read a lot of Holocaust fiction, because it is not respectful. I will leave the article that I read in the description if you want to go and check it out for yourself. But yeah, that's why I tend to avoid Holocaust fiction. I'm quite looking forward to having the Betrayals as one of the books that I read, because I have The Binding by Bridget Collins. She's a writer that I am interested in. I think this has a little bit more magic in the historical fiction, which you probably know is something that I enjoy. I enjoy historical fiction with a kind of light fantasy twist. It doesn't really say very clearly in the description when time it's set. I guess that's because it's set in fantasy, any previous historical period. Going by the aesthetic of the cover, I'm gonna go with early Victorian. That's my guess. Wild stab in the dark, but I feel like that's where we're going. I'll know more when I read it, but I'm gonna get the audiobook on Scribd, so I will be listening to the audiobook of that one. I don't know what to jump in with. I feel like I should read a World War II alternate so that I'm not reading too many World War IIs altogether. Let's go with Those Who Are Loved. It's the biggest one. Probably should start with the biggest one, shouldn't I? I am allowing myself to DNF during these challenges. I do not have to finish it like I did with the Goodreads Choice Awards. If I hate it, I will DNF. But I'm not sure. I'm not very good at DNFing. I never do it, so we'll see. Hello. Out on a walk. Because of course I am, back in lockdown here in England, so can't do anything else but be on a walk. I'm in a forest that I haven't actually been to before, and it is muddy. But I'm here to talk to you about books, obviously. So I've started Those Who Were Loved by Victoria Hislop. I'm listening to the audiobook right now. Well, not right now, but I just was. I will be again in a moment. I'm only about fifth of the way in or something, but I'm actually enjoying it more than I thought I would be. Like, it's not my favourite, I'm not loving it. The writing style is very simple, and there is a lot of stating what you mean on the page, which is something that does annoy me a lot in books, but the characters at least feel really real, and also all of the characters at the moment are like teenagers. Whilst it does annoy me the way that they're talking, it kind of feels realistic to teenagers, like teenagers would talk like that about politics. So yeah, I feel bad for prejudging Victoria Hislop so far anyway. Hopefully it will continue to be an enjoyable book. Okay, so I am a quarter of the way into Those Who Are Loved by Victoria Hislop now, and I don't like it as much as I did to begin with, unfortunately. The sister, Margarita, is really like two-dimensional and really like vapid girl stereotype, which is annoying me. And then everything keeps being stated really obviously. Like, he couldn't resist ever giving a dig at his brother. Yes, I know, because he keeps giving digs at his brother, and then every time he does, you tell me that he couldn't resist it. Which is really annoying writing. I'm probably going to continue because I'm only a quarter of the way through and the war's nearly over. So clearly this keeps going past the Second World War, and I'm intrigued by the period of history because I don't know much about Greece at this time at all. I mean, I don't know much about Greece after the 1st century AD, so there's a lot I could learn. I'm interested in it for that reason, which is one of the reasons that I love reading historical fiction, but so far the writing is annoying me. Hello, you're going to have to excuse the terrible lighting. I think this is just going to be us until April now. Got my chamomile tea. Still too hot. Okay, so I am a certain way through this. Can't tell you exactly how. Hang on, sorry. I've come here really unorganised. Hang on. So I'm about this way through Those Who Are Loved, and I am really not enjoying myself now. It is really a slog to get through. It does all of the things I hate, tells you exactly what's happening, repeats itself in ad infinitum as if your readers are stupid. It keeps spouting facts about the situation, the historical situation that Victoria Hislop has obviously learnt during her research, but has no relevance to the plot whatsoever. I only want to see it from the perspective that you're telling the story. I don't want these big overarching facts that they don't know, because it doesn't feel ingrained in the story. It feels like you're just telling me the stuff you learned. So I'm going to put it down for now and start listening to The Betrayals by Bridget Collins, and maybe reading another one of the physical books. I'm not sure. Hopefully I'll come back to Those Who Are Loved, because I don't want to not read it. There's a reason I do these videos, but for now I'm going to put it down because I am still allowing myself to DNF as part of these challenges if I want to. And I feel like I don't want to keep putting myself through something that I don't enjoy just for a challenge. The reason I'm doing these challenges is to talk about what is popular in historical fiction, why these are bestsellers, why people love them, and how I feel about them at the same time, trying to understand how they get to become popular. This one I'm confused on now because it doesn't even feel like it's an easy read. Like, I'm finding it very difficult to read. Not because the actual sentences are difficult or anything like that, but because it doesn't have anything that's gripping me. I'm really not interested in what's going on at all, but maybe other people do care. So I'm going to try and read The Betrayals by Bridget, which I think will be fun because it's a bit more fantasy, historical fiction, which is something that I do enjoy. It is my kind of escapism. Maybe I'll move on to Philippa Gregory. I feel like at least Philippa Gregory will be a bit more sensationalist, so maybe there'll be more to enjoy there, but I don't know how frustrating I'll find that one at the same time. So I've done what I said I would, and I have started The Betrayals by Bridget, and I don't really know why it's been categorised as historical fiction. It's most definitely fantasy. Well, I suppose maybe because there's no actual magic that's happened yet, so I guess calling it fantasy seems a bit strange as well. But I guess if The Handmaid's Tale gets categorised in fantasy, then this could be fantasy for that reason. Like, it's an alternate world. There's not quite a dystopia. It seems to be more of an allegory so far. Anyway, I'm enjoying the writing. I'm enjoying this mysterious grand jeu that we don't know what it is yet, except that there are definitely chess overtones. There's a checkerboard and there is gambits. Not really sure. It's very dark academia, which is great. It's set in a school where they teach you how to do le grand jeu. Grand jeu is our national game of this nation. We don't know what the nation is. Mention of Prussia, but also a lot of it's French, so mysterious pan-European country so far. And then also on top of that, they're starting to persecute Christians. And so I don't know if this is supposed to be a Nazism Holocaust allegory, but it kind of feels like that. Burning books and stuff. But yeah, I'm unsure as to now why it's been classified as historical fiction. Maybe it will more come to light what's actually going on, or if it's just an allegory. I'm uncertain of the allegory so far. I feel like it's weird to replace Jewish people with Christians, if that is what it is an allegory of. Obviously, if it's not that, then that's different. Okay, we've got a date now, 1926, so I guess that's why it's set in historical period, or considered to be historical fiction. I don't know how grounded it is in real life history. It seems not at all, but we'll have to see. Oh, I'm sleepy, but it does mean that even though I'm no longer reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz, 4 of these books are still early mid 20th century books. Interwar to Second World War books. I guess that's just what's popular. I guess that's something we've learned, that it sells well, is World War II books. Not that you didn't know that already. I've been listening to the audiobook of The Binding, and I've only got about 5 hours left, which means I've listened to about 2/3 of it already. So you can see I'm definitely enjoying it a lot more than Those Who Are Loved. I like the writing style. It feels a little Philip Pullman, a little Night Circus, but I don't think I'd consider it historical fiction. Like, there is some like Nazi-ness going on in it, but they're definitely not the actual Nazis, they're fantasy Nazis. Hoping there's a twist that I could see potentially being used in this, and I'm hoping it's not going to be used. Like, I'm not going to mention what I think it might be, because I don't want to spoil the book, but I'm hoping it's not that, because that would be kind of a cop-out. It's definitely a more enjoyable experience. I'm definitely getting through it more, but I felt like the ending could either make or break this book for me, so we'll have to see how that goes. Hello! So it is morning. I am reading The Giver of Stars now. I am about 1/3 of the way through so far. So I've got further than I managed to get on Those Who Were Loved, which I put down at about 1/4 of the way through. The writing is definitely less clunky than Victoria Hislop. There's less like random exposition and telling me exactly what all of the characters are feeling. There's a little bit of that. There's bits where it says, oh, he smiled conspiratorially, as if he thought this. And it's like, can you just not leave it at the smile? And let me work out what he's thinking or what he's talking about. But I guess makes sense for people who don't read a lot, because if you don't read a lot, you're maybe less accustomed to reading between the lines, and so this might work for people who don't read as much. I don't know if that's the reason. It's set in Kentucky in the 1930s, in the Appalachian part of Kentucky, the Appalachian Mountains, and I don't know how sensitive or how good Jojo Moyes is going to be at writing it. Right now, to me, it seems like they're talking, when she writes dialogue for other people, they're talking with just a southern accent, because Jojo Moyes is an English writer, so she's not from Kentucky, she doesn't, but I don't know if they're being really stereotypical. I'm also not sure how well she's dealing with Appalachia, because I know Kendra Winchester, whose channel I will leave in the description, is from Appalachia, and she talks about the writing about Appalachia and how it's written about in literature and how it's kind of talked down to, and Jojo Moyes was not that sensitive when she was writing about disability in Me Before You, so I don't know how sensitive she is being about Appalachia. I also was looking it up to see if anyone had talked about the Appalachia, and apparently another author thinks she stole the book. I haven't done that much research about it, but I just thought I'd mention that. I think there's going to be a certain relationship in here, but it's only been vaguely hinted at so far. So yeah, it seems like it's going to be quite a predictable book, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not going to be one of my favourite books because of that reason. Anyway, I think I can probably finish this one, whereas Those Who Are Loved, I don't know if I'm going to go back to. I'm also going to start listening to Tidelands by Philippa Gregory now, and try and read as much as possible of this today, and I'll get back to you when I have some more thoughts. Hello! So, I have finished The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes now, and I used my reading journal. I actually used it whilst I was reading. Well, I lost it down the back of the sofa, honestly, and I've just found it, so everything else I've had to fill in after the fact, but I have written things down whilst I was reading it. What did I think of this? I can't tell you what score I give it. Basically, the story is all right. The story that actually happens in the book is fine. Cozy Sunday afternoon, easy watching southern US vibes that there are. Like, it's a Sweet Home Alabama kind of a book, except it's set in Kentucky and not Alabama, and it's not about rich southern people whose great granddaddy owned slaves, but about poor southern people who live in Appalachia. I know that Appalachia is one of those places that's like got bad media representation in terms of things that either represented as like hillbilly, slack-jawed yokel sleeping with your cousin, or like this more romantic idea, and that neither of those are like completely true or honest to the place. I will leave Kendra Winchester's videos about Appalachia in the description because she's from there and she talks about Appalachia a lot and about hillbilly elegy and about the bad media representation of Appalachia. Kind of vaguely touches on things that are bad that happened in the past, like segregation in the US and domestic abuse and like incest, slightly, very slightly, but in a really cozy way that feels really, it doesn't quite line up together, it doesn't quite work. And one of the most annoying things to me is about this woman who was kind of coded queer in the beginning, and also like independent woman, doesn't want to be tied down, doesn't want to get married because she just doesn't like the idea of being tied down, likes to like ride through the mountains with a gun, and doesn't care what people think of her, completely changes into this glorious, soft, caring pinnacle of femininity when she has a baby, obviously. Sometimes the language seems really modern. Like, I'm not an expert on what 1930s Kentucky language would be like, but it was like a lot of it just sounded like modern people from the UK talking, and so I just didn't think it really lined up. And then when it was in colloquial, I don't know that she really grasped the colloquialism of Kentucky, particularly historical Kentucky. Like, that's a whole different ball game that I feel like would need a lot of research. But she would constantly be saying he looked at her as if, he moved like this as if, he did this as if, to kind of get you into the mind of the other people through using as if. It happened like 3 times in one paragraph, and it was really frustrating. I'd rather she just describe the movement and let the reader interpret what that movement meant, rather than like giving me everything on a plate. Must we continue with the misogynistic trope that a woman is tough because she has brothers? But the thing is, it's not a bad story. And like, I don't know if it's because I've read this immediately after reading Those Who Are Loved, or DNFing Those Who Are Loved, which was so much clunkier, so badly written, so giving us everything and really, really clunky, that this felt like, well, she's got more skill to her writing than that. So I don't know if I'm reading it favourably. I feel like this is a good book for people who don't read a lot and need to pick something up for a holiday or for lockdown, and they just need something to do, so they pick up a book and they read this, because it's got the skill to get you through. It's got some interesting characters, very, very predictable, knew exactly what was going to happen throughout. But if you don't read a lot and you just want to read for fun, that could be what you want from this. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you probably read a lot more than that, so this is not going to be for you. But I can see why it is the #1 bestseller and why it is really popular. Like, I understand that part of it, but it is not a book that I love. I now have to move on to the Philippa Gregory, Tidelands by Philippa Gregory, and I've started it. I'm not very far in. I started with the audiobook, so I don't actually know, can't show you exactly how far I am in, but not very far at all. And I really have to apologise to Philippa Gregory. Like, I'm only a little way in, and we know from the fact that I enjoyed the beginning of Those Who Were Loved, like the very beginning, that I can't necessarily say that I'm not going to end up hating this book. The thing is, when I first picked up Philippa Gregory a few years ago, and I really didn't like it. I hadn't done these tests that I've put myself through over the past 2 months. I hadn't read a lot of popular historical fiction, and so comparing Philippa Gregory to Hilary Mantel or Barbara Kingsolver is different than comparing Philippa Gregory to Jojo Moyes and Victoria Hislop and that woman who wrote that Holocaust porn. So when I said that I hated, like, I didn't like her first book, that the only other book of hers that I've attempted to read, it was with less of a understanding of the genre more generally, like the popular books in the genre. Now, obviously, the main woman is a witch. Obviously, because if you have read any of Philippa Gregory, she wants all of women in history to have been witches. She's obsessed. So the main woman is a witch, but it is introduced from the beginning that she's a witch, and I feel like witch trials might be part of it because it's set in 1649. She is helping a Catholic priest who has come over from France to try and help the king get out of his imprisonment on the Isle of Wight. So that's kind of where we're at here. It's set during the English Civil War. And he's run up at the Tidelands, which are on the south of England, like in this place where it's constantly shifting and nothing stays the same because the tides change the lay of the land over the course of the year, which is a really interesting setting. I really love that setting. Excellent setting. So I'm going to read this and then we're going to see how we go. And then after that, I've got a single thread. But the thing that I did want to mention about this that I forgot is that although it's set in the 1930s, it's much more about 1930s America and the Great Depression. The Second World War, or the loomingness of the Second World War, doesn't come into it at all. But I'm going to get on, finish this, and then I'll come back to you and tell you what I think. Maybe when something comes up and I want to shout about it. Okay, so I am about a third of the way through Tidelands, about there, and it's not as bad as I thought. Yes, I have to admit now, having read a wider range of popular historical fiction, she's not a terrible writer. Her descriptions are good. I can imagine the place. The place itself is really atmospheric. It's not my favourite. It's not beautiful lyrical writing, but it's, you know, it's all right. It's fine. It's good. It's quality writing. There is skill in the writing. It is witchy women of history, definitely 100%, but I think you know that going into Philippa Gregory, that she wants every woman in the past to be a witch. The problem is not so much the style of the writing, which would be acceptable. The plot is where I have problems with it. I mean, I'm only this far in, so and I'm fine with books having more plot than my favourite books have, but the insta-love was actually ridiculous. I could not believe how quickly these characters fall in love. Like, they barely met, and I'm supposed to believe that they are in love with one another, even though their circumstances would suggest that they would not that they could not be in love, but the woman at least should be a little more like jaded than that. I can't really understand their motivation. So also, they had a conflict between these two main characters that happened. The woman seemed to be behaving completely out of character and really weird, and then suddenly it made a conflict, but it didn't make sense, and she was just like suddenly crying and shouting, and I'm just like, but why though? That doesn't make sense for this character that you've built up. Of course, she does healing. He suddenly becomes very, very sick. She has to be locked in a shed with him. That's where we're at right now. She's locked in the shed. I'm pretty sure he's not going to die. I don't think that's really a spoiler, but it's just like, for God's sake, can everything seem less contrived and more embedded in the characters? Because I'm kind of annoyed about the contrivance of it. But yeah, it's not terrible. I'm making my way through it, and I don't think I'm going to DNF it. I appreciate Philippa Gregory's writing more, comparing it to some of the other historical fiction that I've had to read, or I've made myself read for these challenges. I think I like stuff that's set. This is set during the Civil War, the English Civil War, 1650s, 1640s, 1650s, and I think that I prefer historical fiction that's from before the 20th century. I think that's something that I've worked out about myself, because I'm enjoying that aspect of this, and I also like that it's not about kings and queens, although it is a bit about the king, but it's not all about the kings and queens in the court. It's about like poor people, and I enjoy that. But I think one of the things that I've noticed from this experiment is that one of the main differences between literary fiction and commercial fiction is that literary fiction gives more space for the reader. Literary fiction is more like a collaboration. You have to work with the writer to your own interpretation, your own understanding is part of the reading experience, whereas commercial fiction is more like a TV series wherein you are given everything. Everything is given to you. You are just enjoying a story. Your own experience and interpretation and understanding, your own brain is not part of it. It's just to sort of switch off and enjoy a story. So you were given everything. There's just less space. There's less space for the reader to be part of the experience. You are an observer rather than an interpreter, I guess. Maybe that's kind of an idea that I've had anyway whilst I was reading this, that I prefer books that allow me in more, where I have to do more work. I don't like my reading to be so passive, and I feel like that's what commercial fiction is giving me, or commercial historical fiction is giving me anyway. But that's just off the top of my head thought, so maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to hear what you have to think about that. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that in the comments. What do you think makes the difference between commercial and literary fiction, apart from, snobbery? But yeah, I'm going to get back to reading this, and then we'll move on to the Tracey Chevalier. I'm still reading Tidelands. I haven't got much further, but I just wanted to show you that it is snowing. Everywhere else in the country has had snow for like a week. They've all been posting pictures. They've been talking about it. We've had nothing. We keep being promised snow, and then it keeps just changing overnight to rain, and it's really annoying. But yes. Hello, it's the evening, and I have just finished Tidelands by Philippa Gregory. What did I think of it? Well, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, which is kind of unfair, I suppose. I've been slandering Philippa Gregory. Sometimes it reminded me a little bit of Ken Follett, if Ken Follett cared about women. And by that, what I mean is that it was very clear that Philippa Gregory had done a lot of research on what the characters who lived in the 17th century in a coastal town would have, what their life would have been like, how they would have gone about their daily work, and how they would have prayed, and their beliefs, and that sort of thing was very clear in it. But I thought it was a little more engaging than the way Ken Follett writes it. That could potentially be because I care more about women, or it could potentially be because it was more integrated into the characters than Ken Follett, where the characters didn't really feel like real people. These didn't feel like real people that much either, but they definitely felt a little more rounded than Ken Follett's characters. The thing is that I feel like she did a really pretty good job of setting up the atmosphere and setting up the historical time period and making us feel like it was really integrated into that time period, but she didn't do a great job with the plot. And I don't really care for very plotty books a lot of the time. I don't mind books where not a lot happens. But what happened in this book felt like very much basic life, sudden event, very much basic life, sudden event. And they just felt very melodramatic, and then not a lot happening, and it was all atmospheric and mood and setting, and then sudden, very dramatic, melodramatic events. It was better than some of the books that I've read. I think it was better than the Jojo Moyes, and it was definitely better than the Victoria Hislop. And it's often hard for me when I've just finished a book. I feel like I need to sit and percolate a little while to see how everything diffuses out. I also felt like, despite Philippa Gregory talking about feminism, there was something that happened in this book that felt very pro-lifey, and it doesn't really matter, but it didn't feel true to this character, her job. She was a midwife, and her experience in life, it felt strange, and it was the same was true of the romance. It didn't feel real, it just felt strange. It didn't feel like they were just thrown together randomly, and then it happened, and then the man did a lot of things that we were like, and I could see the point. It was making clear the limitations of his class and his beliefs and the places he'd come from, the way that he would believe things against her and dislike her just because of classist reasons. But, it didn't seem to make any sense that this woman, who's described as so powerful and clever and interesting, despite her poverty, would care for this man, because there didn't seem to be any reason for it to happen, except they suddenly just fancied each other. And their love just it felt very dramatic and not very true. The pro-lifey part felt very against what this character's experience would have been, and it felt just like it happened for the continuation of the series, rather than because this is what those characters would have done. And the same is true with the romance. It felt very much it was about the continuation of the series and these ideas that she wanted to explore, rather than coming from the characters themselves, which meant that I could see her writer's work within it. And with a skilled writer, like with a skilled actor, you want them to disappear. And I don't think Philippa Gregory really disappeared. I could see her being like, so yeah, I'd done my research, and also being like, I need this person here for this plot point in the future that I'm thinking of. So it just didn't feel that organic. The ending also felt very rushed, and I could see slightly the reason, but it stopped really abruptly. And wasn't fully explained, and I feel like that's again because it's like, oh, but this isn't the end really, because you know there's going to be another one. It didn't felt like there was a lot of setup of the setting, the time periods, and then a rush to get to a cliffhanger for the next book, which I don't like. I don't want my books to be like that. I want to feel satisfied enough with one and still intrigued for another, and I don't really feel either. I'm going to start a single thread, which is my last one for this video. And hopefully I will like it, because I know a lot of people do like this one. I know a lot of people do like Tracey Chevalier. One other thing that I forgot about the Tidelands is that, of course, the main woman had to be incredibly beautiful, the most stunningly beautiful woman, and all men were attracted to her, and all women were jealous of her because she was beautiful. I really hate that trope. I just think it's tired and boring and not very feminist of you, Philippa Gregory. So I'm enjoying a single thread so far. I'm about 20% of the way in, and it's nice, it's well written, it's enjoyable. It's quite a Sunday afternoon read, I guess I would say. It's about a woman who is unmarried at 38 in the 1930s, who had a fiancé who died during the First World War, and her brother also died during the First World War. She moved out of her mother's house because her mother was not very nice after her father died, and moved to Winchester, and she's going to start embroidering kneelers. She's joining this group of women who are embroiderers, and there's this bell ringer man who there might be something with, and it just feels quite nice and cozy and sweet, but in a like the best way. I just noticed a single thread has been blurred by Bridget, who wrote the Betrayals, which I read at the beginning of this vlog. Synergy. Hello, so I have finished a single thread by Tracey Chevalier. I enjoyed this book. It is kind of like a cozy Sunday film of a book. There is a little bit of a feeling of tension overhanging the whole book, in regards to, there's mentions of like Hitler becoming Chancellor and the consolidation of his power, and like that hangs over this like Winchester and this woman. It's sort of the threats that women face, I guess, is kind of part of the feeling of here. She's kind of tying the threat of looming war with the threats that women face just existing in the 1930s in England. So there's like moments of talk about sexual violence, and the way that she's viewed, the main character Violet is viewed as an unmarried woman in her late 30s, the way that she's viewed in terms of her job and women leaving jobs when they get married and that sort of thing, and also like all of the work that women take on that isn't paid labour, like unpaid labour. That's a big thing that's part of this book. It's not lightly. It is sometimes very heavy-handed, and that is the thing that I didn't like about this book. But it's light in terms of tone for the most part. There is I guess there was this feeling of tension that just, I didn't feel quite integrated well with the book. There was this thread of the narrative that I just felt was, I could see the reason that it was put in, but it didn't feel fully integrated into the narrative. And I don't want to spoil it, but it was involving violence, sexual violence, and I just felt like it was unnecessary. There is also queer representation in here, lesbian representation among secondary characters, which is interesting, the way that it was explored in the 1930s and the way that people like brush things under the rug. There was just a bit of tonal mismatch that I felt like happened. And there was also, when she started talking about her feelings of loss and her feelings for this man, it didn't feel honest or real. It felt very melodrama and put on. So I wasn't a huge fan of that part of it. I mean, overall I'd give it about 3.5 out of 5, so it's not a bad book. It's a good book. I had a decently good time reading it. I wasn't dreading reading it or anything like that, but I didn't love it either. It just wasn't quite for me. It's a cozy book that's not quite my kind of cozy, and I didn't think that the way that it dealt with the themes was very particularly strong. So that is it. I've read all of these 5 popular historical fiction books. I didn't finish them all. First I listened to the audiobook of The Betrayals by Bridget, which I did enjoy. Again, I'd probably give that one a 4 out of 5, 3.5 to 4 out of 5. It was good, it was well written, beautifully written. I really enjoyed the game Le Grand Jeu, and the fact that you never really get to know what it is properly. I like that. I like the dark academia. I thought the vibes were great. There was a relationship in it that I loved until the point of a twist, and the twist really let me down in terms of this book. And I also don't really think it should be cast as historical fiction just because it mentions the date 1926, and then 10 years after 1926, so 20s and 30s is when this is set, and there are some similarities to the 20s and 30s in our time, in our world, what they were like, and you can see that it's drawing on things like Brideshead and like campus novels of that time in terms of the way that it's written. It's an alternate history, and I don't know whether alternate history counts as historical fiction when it's so clearly not our history. Christians being persecuted as a metaphor for the Holocaust, which I find uncomfortable anyway, but then again I don't know where else you'd class it. Then I began to read Those Who Are Loved by Victoria Hislop, and I enjoyed the first 20 pages, and then I got to 150 or so pages in and DNF'd it because I really couldn't stand it anymore. Everyone felt like a 2D cutout of a character. Like, this was this perspective, this was this perspective. There was no complexity to any of the characters. And then in addition to that, the writing itself wasn't good. The writing was research that she'd done plonked in the most simplistic language, and then the characters went through what they went through. It felt very explanatory and very basic. It didn't feel very lived in, and I didn't care about what was going on. It took me like 4 days to read 150 pages of this, and it took me 2 days to read all 300 pages of this because I just didn't want to pick it up. Then I did finish The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, which is set in 1930s Appalachia about a woman who moves from England, marries a man who lives in Kentucky, and they move to a small town, and she joins this other woman in setting up a Pack Horse library, taking books around to the poor people in this library. This was a Nicholas Sparks film in a book. It was very like heartwarming with serious tragedies that happen, but it's not really properly explored, like glancing mentions of racism and sexism and sexual violence, but not really, just sort of plonked in there. Again, the characters were very black and white, very this is good, this is bad, and I'd give it a 2.5, and I wasn't allowed to get into the book. It was like it was played out flat in front of me. Then I read Tidelands by Philippa Gregory, which is about a woman in 1648. I think that this one was better than some of the others, better written in the way that the characters felt more rounded, but still not all the way there that I prefer. And there was also a lot of attention to historical detail here that I guess the difference is that the 1930s is not so far from 2020 as 1640s. Obviously, that's how time works. But, you get more sense of it being in a historical period because there is more difference. But still, at the same time, sometimes it felt like, again, I've done a lot of research on what women's lives would have been like in this time. I did like that it was focused on a poor woman, but I didn't really, the love in here, the relationship in here was ridiculous. I didn't really understand anyone's motivations, and it was very speedy at the end. Just suddenly a lot of stuff happens without really any explanation. And so I gave this like 3 stars, I guess. Like, I didn't hate reading it. I feel sorry for Philippa Gregory that I thought that she was the worst that historical fiction had to offer when this exists. So, and then finally A Single Thread, which was probably the most skillfully written of the books. It definitely didn't, it allowed me in more, it allowed me more room to interpret, more room to think about the themes and the ideas, but still I felt like didn't quite connect with what it was trying to do. Although I liked it, it's not something that I ever will want to revisit. So this video, kind of the reason for this video was to explore whether best-selling historical fiction is any good, if I'm a snob about popular historical fiction. But the thing is, I went to the best-selling historical fiction, and these were the 5 books that were in the top that I hadn't already read. I had already read a lot of the best-selling historical fiction. I had chosen to, been interested in, gone out and read best-selling historical fiction. My favourite book of last year, The Mirror and the Light, was higher than some of these books in terms of best-selling historical fiction. So the fact is that yes, best-selling historical fiction can be something that I think is good, something that I enjoy. I think I was trying to explore maybe the idea of the difference between more literary and more popular historical fiction, but literary historical fiction does sell. And while this is not really my favourite, again, Hamnet was the best-selling out of all of these books. And again, I didn't that book didn't make it into my top 10, but it was a book that I really enjoyed last year. So I can't say that I don't enjoy popular historical fiction. I do enjoy historical fiction that has a big readership, that does really well. And the line of what is literary and what is popular, I guess, is a nebulous thing. Like, there's not this clear, distinct line between this is literary and this is popular, because, as we can see with Hilary Mantel, literary can also be popular. And so maybe I've discovered some things, like more commercial historical fiction often puts everything out on the page for you. It doesn't allow you the same space to explore the ideas or to interpret things. And these books, these popular books that are picked up by people who don't read as often, I think give you more in terms of a flat, everything is out here on the page. And I think that's because people don't necessarily want to be doing as much work with their reading if they don't read as often, if reading is just something that they do occasionally as a way to turn their brain off. There has to be brain off fiction as there is brain on fiction. So I don't really know what point I'm trying to make. I'm not really trying to make any point. I'm just talking to you about some of the things that I've thought whilst doing this experiment. I hope you found something interesting out of this video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments about popular versus literary fiction, or anything that you have thought about historical fiction more generally. I would love to know your thoughts, and I would love to continue this discussion in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe for more book challenges, because there will be another one coming next month. And I will see you again very soon. Bye bye!